appreciate the extra time, Mr. President. The team has been in quarantine for almost 2 weeks, so this interview is very important to us. I want to ask you about China. China is working on its 4th aircraft carrier. It has 2. Russia has 1, and it's not in service at the moment. China refused to take part in arms control talks last year. You complain so much about NATO to your west. Why do you never complain about China's militarization to your east?
The first thing I want to say is that over the last few years, the last few decades, we have developed a strategic partnership relationship between Russia and China that previously had not been achieved in the history of our two nations. A high level of trust and cooperation, and in all areas, in politics, in the economy, in technology, and in the area of military and technical cooperation. We do not believe that China is a threat to us. That's one. China is a friendly nation. It has not declared us an enemy, as the United States has done.
China hasn't been...
Don't you know anything about this? So that's number one. Number two is that China is a huge, powerful country, 1.5 billion people. In terms of purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy has exceeded the size of the US economy. And in terms of trade, for the previous year, last year, China tied Europe for the first place, whereas the US dropped to the second position. Do you know about this? China has been developing, and I understand that what's beginning to happen is a certain kind of confrontation with China. Everybody understands it. We can see it. Why hide from this or be scared by these issues? However, we're not alarmed by it, including, among other things, the fact that our defense sufficiency, as we call it, is at a very high level, including because of this. But the most important thing is the nature and level of our relationship with China. You said China will have 4 aircraft carriers. How many does the United States have?
A lot more.
There you go. That's my point. Why would we worry about the Chinese aircraft carriers? On top of everything else, we have a vast border with China, but it's a land border. What, do you think the Chinese aircraft carriers will be sent to cross our land border into our territory? This is just a meaningless conversation.
But you also have a Pacific coast.
But you're right, there will be 4 of them. Yes, there will be 4 of them. Coast? Well, the coast is huge, but the bulk of the border between us and China is a land border. And yes, you're right that there will be 4 of them, because 1 needs to be in maintenance, 1 needs to be on combat duty, 1 needs to be in repairs. There is nothing excessive here for China. That is why what you said, that China won't engage in negotiations, arms control, it refuses to negotiate reductions in nuclear offensive weapons. You should ask the Chinese about it, whether it's good or bad. It's up to them. But their arguments are simple and they're understandable. The level, both in terms of the amount of ammunition and warheads and delivery vehicles, the United States and Russia are far ahead of China. And the Chinese justly ask, why would we make reductions if we are already far behind what you have? Or do you want us to freeze our level of nuclear deterrence? Why should we freeze? Why we, a country with 1.5 billion population, cannot at least set the goal of achieving your levels? These are all debatable issues that require thorough consideration, but making us responsible for China's position is just comical.
What do you think of China's treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
You know, I have met certain Uyghurs. It's always possible to find individuals who criticize the central authorities. I have met Uyghurs on my trips to China, and I assure you, at the very least, from what I heard with my own ears, that on the whole, they welcome the policies of the Chinese authorities in this area. They believe that China has done a great deal for people who live in this part of the country from the perspective of the economy, raising the cultural level, and so on and so forth. So why should I offer assessments looking at the situation from outside?
Indeed. You know there are many Uyghurs who do not say that, and that America has accused China of genocide. The Secretary of State has accused China of genocide over the Uyghurs. There is the accusation of 1 million Uyghurs in so-called concentration camps. Is that your message to the Muslim communities in the former Soviet Union? You don't think anything wrong is happening there?
As far as the Muslim community in Russia, I need to give a message to it through the policies of the Russian authorities vis-à-vis Muslims in the Russian Federation. That is how I need to give my message to the Muslim community in the Russian Federation. Russia is an observer in the Organization of Islamic Conference. About 10% of our population, perhaps a little more, are Muslims. They are citizens of the Russian Federation who do not have another fatherland. They are making a colossal contribution to the development of this country, and that pertains to both clerics and ordinary citizens. Why should I speak to and build a relationship with this segment of our population by reference to the situation in China without understanding thoroughly what is happening there? I think you're better off asking about all these problems the foreign minister of the Chinese People's Republic or the State Department.
It's just a question of whether you are prepared to criticize China. China, for example, abstained on Crimea at the Security Council. China's biggest banks have not contravened American sanctions against Russia. Do you think you get 100% support from China?
You know, we are neighboring countries. One does not choose one's neighbors. We are pleased with the level of our relationship, which, as I said, is unprecedentedly high, as it has evolved over the last few decades, and we cherish it, just like our Chinese friends cherish it, which we can see. Why are you trying to drag us into some kind of issues that you evaluate as you see fit for building your relationship with China? I will tell you completely honestly. Can I be completely honest?
Please, yeah.
We can see attempts at destroying the relationship between Russia and China. We can see that those attempts are being made in practical policies. And your questions, too, have to do with that. I have set forth my position for you. I believe that this is sufficient, and I am confident that the Chinese leadership, being aware of the totality of these matters, including the part of their population who are Uyghurs, will find the necessary solution to make sure that the situation remains stable and benefits the entire multi-million-strong Chinese people, including its Uyghur part.
You understand, of course. I'm just trying to question you about Russia's position in relation to China and the United States. Let me ask you in a different way. Are you splitting off from the US space program and moving forward with China?
No, no, why would you say that? We are prepared to work with the US in space, and I think recently the head of NASA said that he could not imagine development of space programs without its partnership with Russia. We welcome this statement, and we
I'll just
value
explain,
it.
because the head of the Russia Space Agency has threatened leaving the International Space Program in 2025, and specifically talked about sanctions in relation to that threat.
Well, honestly, I do not think that Mr. Rogozin, which is the name of the head of Roscosmos, has threatened anyone in this regard. I've known him for many years, and I know that he is a supporter of expanding the relationship with the United States in this area, in space. Recently, as I said, the head of NASA spoke in the same vein, and I personally fully support this, and we have been working with great pleasure all of these years, and we're prepared to continue to work. For technical reasons, though, and that is a different matter, is that the International Space Station is coming to an end of its service life, and maybe in this regard, Roscosmos does not have plans to continue their work. However, based on what I heard from our US partners, they too are looking at future cooperation in this particular segment in their own way. But on the whole, the cooperation between our two countries in space is a great example of a situation where, despite any kinds of problems in political relationships in recent years, it is an area where we have been able to maintain and preserve the partnership, and both parties cherish it. I just think that you misunderstood the head of our space agency. We are interested, and I assure you, in continuing to work with the US in this direction, and we will continue to do so if our US partners don't refuse to do that. It doesn't mean that we need to work exclusively with the US. We have been working and will continue to work with China, which applies to all kinds of programs, including exploring deep space. And I think there is nothing but positive information here. Frankly, I don't see any contradictions here.
Let me ask you one more way, just to understand the relationship between China, Russia, and America. If the People's Liberation Army made a move on Taiwan, how would Russia respond to that?
Are you aware of China's plans to militarily solve the Taiwan problem? I don't know anything about that. As we frequently say, politics do not require the subjunctive mood. The subjunctive mood is inappropriate in politics. There is no could be and would be in politics. I cannot comment on anything that is not a current reality of the modern world. Please bear with me. Don't be upset with me. But I think that this is a question about nothing. This is not happening. Has China stated that it intends to solve the Taiwan problem militarily? It hasn't happened so far. For many years, China has been developing its relationship with Taiwan. There are different assessments. China has its own assessment, the US has a different assessment, Taiwan may have its different assessment of the situation, but fortunately, it hasn't come to a military clash.
I'm being told to wrap up, but if I could just ask you a couple more questions.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Our own Andrea Mitchell saw just this month the last border crossing into Syria, where supplies literally keep people alive. You're threatening to close that crossing in July at the Security Council. Why would you do that, knowing that it will cause the death of refugees?
Look, unfortunately, there are already a great deal of tragedies there, and all our actions in their totality need to be geared at stabilizing the situation and bringing it into a normal course of events. And with support of Russia, Syria The Syrian authorities have been able to bring back under their control over 90% of the Syrian territory. What needs to be set up now is humanitarian assistance to people irrespective of any kind of political context. However, our partners in the West in general, both the United States and the Europeans, have been saying that they're not going to give any help to Assad. What does Assad have to do with it? Help people who need that assistance, just the most basic things. They won't even lift restrictions on supplies of medications and medical equipment, even in the context of the coronavirus infection. But that is just inhumane. And this kind of cruel attitude to people cannot be explained in any way. As far as the border crossings for delivery of humanitarian assistance, there is the Idlib area where combatants are still robbing people, killing people, raping people. There is the Al-Tanf zone, which, by the way, is controlled by the U.S. military. Recently, we caught there a group of gangsters who had come from there, and they directly said that they had specific goals as far as Russian military facilities. As far as border crossings, our position is such that assistance needs to be given just as it should be done in the entire world and as it is provided for in the rules of international humanitarian law through the central government. That is how assistance should be given, and it should not be discriminated against. And if there are grounds to believe that the central government of Syria will plunder something, will steal something, we'll set up observers on the part of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent who will oversee everything. I don't think that anybody in the Syrian government is interested in stealing some part of this humanitarian assistance. It just needs to be done through the central government. And in this sense, we support President Assad because a different mode of behavior would be undermining the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic, and that's all. As far as the Idlib zone, the Turkish troops there effectively control the border between Turkey and Syria, and convoys cross the border without any restrictions on their numbers in both directions.
Mr. President, you extended the Constitution so that you could be president of Russia until 2036. Do you worry that the longer you are in power and without any sign of someone to replace you, the more instability there may be when you finally do choose to leave office?
What will collapse overnight? If we look at the situation in which Russia was in the year 2000, where it was balancing on the brink of preserving its territorial integrity and sovereignty, and the number of individuals living below the poverty line was colossal, it was catastrophic. The GDP level had dropped below anything that's acceptable. Our FX and gold reserves were 12 billion, whereas our foreign debt was 120 billion, if we count it in dollars. Now, the situation is different. There are many problems, but the situation is completely different. Of course, somebody will come and replace me at some point. Why would all of this collapse? We've been fighting international terrorism. We have nipped it in the bud. Is it supposed to come back to life? I do not think so. Another matter is that on the political arena, different people may emerge with different points of view. Well, great. Very good. You know, I have linked my entire life to the fate of my country to such an extent that there isn't a more meaningful goal in my life than the strengthening of Russia. If anybody else, and if I see that person, even if that person is critical of some areas of what I have been doing, if I can see that this is an individual who has constructive views, that he or she is committed to this country and is prepared to sacrifice his entire life to this country, not just a number of years, no matter his personal attitude to me, I will make sure, I will do everything to make sure that such people will get support. It is a natural biological process. At some point, naturally, someday, we will all be replaced. You will be replaced at where you are, I will be replaced at where I am, but I am confident that the fundamental pillar of the Russian economy and statehood and its political system will be such that Russia will be firmly standing on its feet and looking to the future confidently.
And would you look from that person for some kind of protection the same way that you offered to Boris Yeltsin when you took over?
I'm not even thinking about that. These are third-tier issues. The most important thing, the single most important thing, is the fate of this country and the fate of its people.
Very good. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. President. We've gone over and I really appreciate it. It was a really interesting conversation, so thank you.